it like breeze. Look it like breeze.
Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast, Digressions episode. My name is Chris Hayner, and I am an enterprise architect in the infrastructure space here at Anexinet. Here on AIM Digressions, we will take deeper dives and small asides related to the major topics we discussed in the flagship show. Today, we will be talking some more about privileged access management. With me again to discuss PAM is George Contino, Director of Digital Projects here at Anexinet. How are you today, George?
All right, Chris, how are you doing today?
Not bad. Better than yesterday.
That's good.
So, let's talk about some real-life examples of what can go wrong when PAM is improperly implemented, or worse, not implemented at all. A few years ago, we were working with a customer who had a lot of tight government mandates. They got audited very often, yearly at a minimum, and usually every 6 months. But not only the auditing in general, but because they were a government entity, they had much more strict rules around who could do what. This company was always hiring, and because they were in a competitive marketplace, it was a healthy amount of turnover, so people came in and exited at a rate that is probably higher than most people are accustomed to. One thing that happened, we hired somebody there to be a Linux Windows administrator, which is a pretty big responsibility, and had, by necessity, that kind of a person has a lot of access, right? They have to, in order to make systems work, troubleshoot, be able to log in everything and everywhere. What happened is it turned out he was not entirely truthful on his application. It turned out he was a convicted felon, which, if you're keeping score at home, you can't do that while working for a government agency. So it was a 4-alarm fire. They were going crazy. The person was terminated immediately, and they had to make sure, not only for themselves, but for auditors, they had to make sure that they could verify that every single account that he created was obliterated. They did not have any kind of a centralized system to do that. So it got to the point where they had admins going system by system, looking at every single account, looking at every single event log, because you know full well that if an auditor came in, they couldn't just say, "Oh, we got rid of them, it's fine." The auditor's going to be like, "Whoa, buddy." And it was a weeks-long process, because you never know. He could set up ghost accounts, he could set up, automated things or change logins to system accounts that maybe people didn't recognize. And they were to the point of like being really afraid that something significant was going to happen. And I was thinking about that story the whole time we were talking with Katie and Larry, because it was just like, if they had a single overarching tool where the account was created, the account was managed, and you could watch the account propagate, right, they could have been pull a plug on that account and say, look, it's right there. And then you can look at all these audit logs that were generated by the tool and satisfy an auditor.
Yep.
The fact that they didn't do that, and they didn't, long story short, they didn't get into trouble. They got everything to a level of comfort, and they did get audited, and they did get cleared. And it wasn't like this person was doing anything malicious. He just lied on his application. But
the hours and the time and the dollars spent to go through and reassure themselves that there was nothing going on.
Exactly. And then you got to play the what if game, right?
Yep.
What if this guy was in fact a malicious actor and they had no eyes on all these systems? They could have put an account in there, waited 3 months, and been like, I'm just going to delete everything.
Yeah.
So it was a little terrifying, and it was completely avoidable.
Yeah. Similar stories. Another one that just kind of popped into my head. Similar type of situation. Call came into the help desk for elevated rights. Was a particular user. Wasn't necessarily an admin, but the way the company ultimately functioned is that you could simply make a call to the help desk, kind of state your reasons why, and they would provide you anywhere from an hour to 24 hours of admin access for you to go out and do something.
Right.
And there's no control, nobody monitoring, nobody looking at that, right?
All somebody did was call.
All they did was call, right? And that was a normal practice procedure. The chances you're taking in that kind of environment or that kind of deployment, where if a normal end user did need that, I can control, providing an access through a privileged access management tool such as Psychotic. right? Where now they're logging in, they're going to be limited in the actions. Not only are they RDPing or SSHing, whatever it may be, into a system that they're doing, but now you're monitoring it. You can actually restrict command line type things that they're doing from that session. You can really kind of isolate and lock in to only allow them to do the job that they're asking to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you have that ability to flat out provide elevated access or provide elevated access for a particular task, right? And having that ability to slice and dice that, tools are great. What if it was an access to a SQL database with client information, sensitive information? Nobody's sitting there monitoring or auditing that. What's to say that George isn't using that privileged access to offload all of that sensitive information into a file that I'm going to sneak off the network later, right?
Right.
It's just another example of a horror story within that type of thing without necessarily having the horror. Another scenario, we've walked into environments where, they don't have a tool deployed at all, right? Really just the administrative approach at that point was, I can manage this, I can control this. Well, that may be fine, 10, 15 servers. You start getting anything more than that, an office full of 30 to 40 individuals. Now, I'm talking small size office up. If you don't have the right IT team or what have you, trying to do any of that administrative stuff manually is impossible. So, walking into an organization that's got an Excel file that's just got a password protected on it with the admin logins of every server, virtual server, or application that they have in the environment sitting in a file.
Right.
And oh, by the way, the person who had access to that file, that role has changed 3-4 times. And, the people that had that password, it never changed and the like, right? These are, again, real live scenarios that I think any small to medium-sized company needs to kind of take a step back and take a look at. What is my IT team doing to manage all of these privileged accounts that may exist across our organization, to both not only the servers, but financial systems, HR systems, and the like, right? Somebody's keeping these things. And if there isn't a tool that's ultimately helping you manage those, and they're just wide open, or you're adding users to an admin group here or there through AD without any real control or auditing against it, malicious activity can be happening internally out, right? And that's where what we see from cybersecurity threats, right? Most of it spawns from internal activities, whether intentional or not.
Right.
The larger percentage comes from those type of activities. And if you make it easy, such as putting all of your admin passwords in one file, at any point in time, a user turns disgruntled for any reason, it could wreak havoc on your environment.
Right, even if they're just having a bad day or a bad
just
week.
Bad day, bad week, whatever it may be. Those are, sadly enough, there were real scenarios that we see from a consulting standpoint when we step into the field.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of scratch your head, like, how does a client not see this? The fact of the matter is they're fighting on too many fronts, right? And sometimes they're just fighting to keep the lights on. You know what I mean? So trying to even think about a tool or how to implement it or things they need, sometimes it's just a secondary thought until a crisis happens.
Yeah, and a great example of a situation where a crisis did happen was a story that Katie McCroskey told us from our interview with Psychotic that we shared a few weeks ago. I'm going to cut to that, and we can hear what Katie has to say.
I have a ton of stories about catastrophic insider breaches. So, okay, there's a Japanese pharmaceutical company, and they were looking to, expand North American operations. They acquired a organization based out of Atlanta, Georgia. There was a gentleman working there, and he had been with the organization for a while. But as the merger and acquisition went down, he became, unhappy with how the future of the organization looked. So he ended up leaving the organization. A few months later, they needed additional IT support. He again was there for a few months, and at that point got a better feel for how the organization was turning and was really unhappy with the state and what the organization had done to his buddies, his former colleagues and coworkers. So he was terminated from that position, decided a few months later that he was going to take revenge And through, privilege access that had not been terminated when he was fired, he was able to successfully delete 88 virtual machines off their network. So he completely crippled the organization. Took him about 2 weeks to clean up from that mess. Cost them almost $1 million. I mean, he literally they couldn't ship product. They couldn't cut checks to their vendors or their employees. He deleted their exchange server, so they could not even communicate internally. Just absolutely wiped them out for a solid 2 weeks. So, I mean, I could literally tell you a million different stories on Insider Threat. Now it's not the time. If you want to buy me a beer, we can continue to have this conversation.
And those are just a few examples. A lot of PAM is about making sure that people who do get logged into systems are only doing the things they're supposed to be doing, don't deviate from those normal behaviors. So these are some of the advanced features that you were talking about with locking down commands at the command line and keeping track of shells, things like that for your more secure systems. People who deviate from their normal behaviors can be a sign that they're not genuinely logged in. They're logged in with either stolen credentials or are just internal threats, right? Many companies could benefit from tools such as Privileged Behavior Analytics, which is the machine learning tool that monitors the activity within Secret Server to detect and alert on those kinds of anomalous behaviors. It reminds me of a story I heard a while ago that could have been thwarted by that kind of alerting. There was a documentary I saw about a terrorist who, through some ingenious physical in-person efforts, managed to steal the identity of a high-ranking FBI agent. He infiltrated the FBI and started going through all kinds of classified information, and the people around him assumed he was fine. They just let him do it. He ended up causing tons of damage and almost destroyed half of a beach town in California. It's crazy.
Wait a minute. Isn't that the plot line of a movie called Face Off?
And that's all the time we have here today on Anexinet's Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Quick disclaimer, the views expressed here on AIM are ours alone and do not necessarily reflect those of Anexinet or any other companies that were mentioned. If you're looking for a company to help you with your infrastructure modernization, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet to see how they can help. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe on your favorite podcatcher, and thank you for tuning in.